Before I open up for discussion, I just want to make 3 or so preliminary points. But firstly, I think we all know that human rights generally and across the world are born out of struggle. They do not just come because we want them to come. But as citizens and not subjects, we must exercise agency. Martin Luther King Jr., in his book, 1963, called Why We Can't Wait, he says that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, but the oppressed must demand it. So we owe it to our agents, we owe it to our citizenship as responsible citizens to demand. And those who wrote the American Constitution, I think one of the founding fathers, says that the rights of men do not come from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. So we don't owe our rights to the state, but at least to the Almighty. So we demand our rights because we are human beings. We have rights because we are human beings. We possess human rights because we are human beings, not because we are citizens of a particular government at a particular time. I just wanted to make that preliminary statement to say that our rights do not come from the benevolence of the state, but from our agents as human beings. If you look even at the history of Zimbabwe, from 1890, during the pioneer column, or the period of occupation in 1890, to the period of independence in 1980, those who liberated the state did not bow down to those who oppressed them to give them rights. The 1898 to 1893 Anglo-Ndebele War was a war of land disposition, where citizens rose against the disposition of their cattle, the disposition of their livestock. They did not ask the oppressor to give them back. The 1896 to 1897, the National Uprising was about land dispossession. You come to the 1960s, it was decolonization. How do we become independent after colonialism, the second Chimurena, where people rose against an oppressive system, leading to 1980 independence in the case of Zimbabwe, but in many African states. So issues of passive resistance and citizenship and civic duty of our people across the continent has a historical basis. So what we talk today to say we demand our rights, at times you hear government saying, no, we are sponsored by foreigners to demand this, but we ask the same question in the 60s, when there were no avenues to freely express, to freely assemble, to freely converse with the government. They took up arms, but we are not taking up arms. We want to interact with the government, with other actors at the level of ideas. So the period of wars is past, it was in the 60s. This period we are in is a struggle for ideas, is a struggle to convince another on the best way to govern our states, to govern our citizens, and to interact with those who govern us. And that's the basis of democracy. So the 3 things I want to talk about after Tawan's presentation is to talk about context. What is the context under which we are talking about these conversations? Context matters because it will assist us to understand where we are coming from, where our government is coming from, and as civil society, that which we want to do to address the situation. So I will describe the context we are as a state, as Zimbabwe, as a hybrid context, using scholars like Stephen Levitsky and Lucano Way. We talk about competitive authoritarian regimes that emerge after the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. These competitive authoritarian regimes are same dictators. They are not purely dictatorships and they are not democratic. They are in between. So they've got elements of authoritarian rule, but also elements of democratic democratic rule. So they will put in place nice constitutions, nice institutions that mirror a democratic society. But in practice, they take all steps to violate these democratic principles. If you look, for instance, in the Zimbabwe Constitution, Chapter 4, Bill of Rights, it has everything that you want. You take the Bill of Rights and compare it to the Bill of Rights of the South African Constitution. But the question is practice. So there's a difference between what is and what ought to be. What ought to be being what is in the Constitution. But what is the practice, the empirical, the observable? To what extent are our governments implementing what is in the Constitution? That is the difference. De facto and de jure. What the law says and what happens in practice. Secondly, we are basically discussing the relationship between media and democracy. That's what Comrade Moy was talking about. From a normative point of view, he was talking about the relationship between media and democracy. And when we're talking about the freedom of expression, to do what? To what end? To exercise rights, to what end? So what if you exercise that right? There's a strong interplay between media and democracy, and it is difficult to separate the two. You cannot have a democracy without a free media, or a free media in an undemocratic state. That kind of dissonance doesn't work. There has to be a mutual relationship between media and democracy. Just like we cannot have elections without democracy. Or we can't have democracy without credible elections. So elections and democracy, those concepts work together. Can you have a democracy without elections? Comrade Mkudu, is it possible to have democracy without elections? If elections are a procedural minimalist signifier of a democratic process, how is it possible to have a democracy without elections? But we can have elections without democracy. It is possible to have elections without democracy. That's why people were protesting in the streets of Harare, because there is an attempt to have elections without democracy. But can you have democracy without elections? So these are some of the issues. But also another normative issue we need to appreciate is that this whole issue about internet freedoms, the right to freedom of expression, falls within the domain of what Comrade Mzengi was talking about, the public sphere. Those who did media, democracy, would know about the public sphere from Habermas. He turned 89 last month. By the way, Habermas, the father of the public sphere. But the public sphere that Habermas was talking was the public sphere where they used to go to coffee shops and discuss issues about governance, issues about human rights in coffee shops, in libraries. But now we have the internet as a fundamental democratic place where mediation of ideas, where mediation of how we are governed takes place. So what we have through the internet is the broadening of the public space, of the public sphere, as outlined by Hagen Habermas. But how democratic is this space? We also need to talk about it. If you read this book by our colleague Dominic distributed, you go to page 3. If you go to page 3, you will see some of the undesirable things that the internet can do. But fundamentally, it is a medium that can facilitate change, that can facilitate conversations among citizens, between citizens and policymakers, between policymakers and citizens. But the challenge we have been outlined by Tavan. So our discussion is premised on the good presentation that our colleague talked about in terms of the lumping or by the state of three issues: cybersecurity, electronic transaction, and data protection. What is it that we can do? It is still a bill. A bill is not law until it is signed by the president. Is that not so, Tawan?
Yeah.
So it means within this period where it has not been signed into law or where the president has not ascended it, if we put our issues clearly and lobby and meet with our policymakers through our platforms, there is a chance that certain things can happen, that it can be more directed, it can mirror the way we want these laws to serve the public interest. Because the whole purpose of these laws is to serve the public interest. So in terms of what Tavan has said, and in terms of what this bill says, what is the fundamental public interest of this law? So I open it for discussion now. I open for discussion.
So my concerns are on the data protection bill and the fact that, in this country currently, fine, we don't really have that. But my biggest concern and where I see a gap sort of is with a number of organizations or service providers that handle public data. So I'll give a few examples, like ISPs have data on their customers, banks have data on their customers that they handle, and a lot of it is sensitive data. So there are questions around minimum standards for security in terms of how they protect this data and what sort of provisions can be made in the bill to ensure that everyone complies and everyone has a certain standard of protecting this data. I'm saying this because currently CIPESA is doing their State of Internet Freedom Report, and the theme for this year is looking at privacy and data protection. And there are concerns around things like how are banks, for example, handling people's data? What measures do they take, for example, in the case of a breach? What responsibility do they have, for instance, to inform the public, let's say? So if the data protection bill exists in its current form right now, I think it needs to sort of be nuanced to look at different service providers and give specific conditions to say banks should have these terms and those terms to protect people's data. Why I'm saying this is, in some other countries, for example, let's say you run a restaurant. They have like officials that come and regularly check, how the restaurant is run, the status of, hygiene in that place. How do we know that institutions that we are giving our data, like banks, are protecting them in efficient ways? So things like that, I think, are sort of missing in the current bill and need to be a bit more nuanced, looking at different service providers.
Comrade Tawani, do you have any comment on the matter? But I also want to pose another one. What kind of data? What is the definition of the data that the bill talks about? Was my understanding of these hybrid regimes is usually data of a political nature. Data that so what kind of data are they looking at in the bill, so that our colleagues can understand? And what is the definition of that data?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge that this debate is of the state lumping up has reduced us to focusing on one type of narrative. Yeah. And yet in that they are lumping up electronic transactions. The electronic transactions data is equally defined as what type of data should be handled, what are the sensitivities. For example, for banks, whenever you are sending a statement, how many characters do you include of someone's account number itself, or mobile number for mobile network providers? How many digits should you include at the end of the message? How much do you release so that there's not much which is left for someone to add up the coding? It's part of that whole process of the electronic transactions defining data. Then data protection highly thrown at national political level. Very limited in terms of individual data management. If I hand over my data to, for example, the Zimbabwe election transaction, the commission, the next thing I receive messages on my mobile phone. How are they supposed to protect my data from the time they, the current European discussion about data handling? Everyone is sending you even the accounts you opened you had forgotten about. All of a sudden you are receiving a message, we are changing our data handling. That's the type of discussion which should inform our data management. Unfortunately, because the discussion has been poisoned around cyber crimes, to the extent that the key issue they are targeting, which is that of data storage, the data interpretation and privacy, is limited in terms of scope. But as I said, we are almost, I think within this next quarter, we'll have finished reviewing the entire, the blocks of electronic transactions, of data protection and cyber crimes. Highly likely within this coming month.
Is any interventions?
Yeah, I think within the petition, we may begin to look even beyond just this free expression, access to information rights, to also look even at the fundamental economic rights, especially in the light of last week's electronic transaction, EcoCash in particular, as system upgrade that resulted in a number of complaints that also resulted in huge losses for the ordinary citizen. It even had other repercussions that are just outside the person that is transacting. And I know Mr. Zimbabwe did issue some statement around what needs to be done. So it is to take the discussion broader, to say it's not only just about free expression, which is very important and so forth, but there are also rights that are linked that would need the cyber bill to really address. To say if you are a service provider like the telecaches, the eco-caches, what sort of standard ought to be adhered to, and so forth, in light of the economic rights that are subsequent to it.
Thank you. I think he's talking about making sure that we don't limit, when we are talking about internet freedom, we don't limit it to addressing a minimalist democratic approach when we talk about civil and political liberties only. But also talk about how the internet freedoms affect substantive democratization issues. And we are talking about socio-economic issues.
Yeah.
How do these platforms protect those things?
Yeah.
So we need a broader understanding of how the internet can promote not only procedural minimalist civil and political rights, but also maximalist and substantive democratization, which is to do with issues of redistribution, like socio-economic issues. Yes, Moy.
Thanks. I think we part of the debate which is raising also taps into the electronic transactions and the data protection itself. For example, with the internet penetration almost scaling above 50%, what people are opening insurance accounts on their mobile phones. They are banking through mobile phones. In case that someone passes on, how do you handle such information? For example, how do you claim insurance that you have been subscribing through online platforms. Yet you are the only person who had the password, for example, in certain instances. You have been contributing and you are the only holder of the password. And you pass on. How do you claim, you know, if the third party wants to come to redeem your contribution, how is it handled? If, for example, there are challenges pertaining to your transactions through mobile money, how do you seek arbitration? All those things need to be clearly outlined in the electronic transactions bill. But if it is narrowed and lumped with other contentious issues here which we are having, we have problems because we miss out on the critical issues that are impacting on the general citizen as we speak.
Any submissions, comments? You must tell us how your organization that is, you know, in the deep rural areas, you know, is affected by this kind of discussion.
Yeah,
And PYD.
yeah, I'm still following up, and I think it's quite an interesting discussion. I think when we look at the technicalities, to say the other negative impacts that is being explained by Comrade Ruhanya. I mean, as consumers, sometimes in the rural areas, people just don't see much of the other negative because sometimes penetration is not as strong as it is in the urban setup. So you find that the excitement to simply say I'm on WhatsApp, I'm on internet is higher. So people have not experienced much of the negative. So I think let me follow up. I'll make a comment as we go.
But I actually get to that. Some of these discussions we need to take them there.
Yes.
We need to take such kinds in the community so that they can understand the impact and the importance and significance of internet freedoms to their everyday forms of lives, everyday forms of existence.
Yeah, because I think I think there are two things that can be interesting. Internet has been used more for two reasons. One, it can be used as a form of intimidation, because most people don't understand the depth of the discussion we are having here. So the internet is something that they will hear from those who are more knowledgeable than them. So, like you see, during the time of the BVR process, for the people, the internet will be used. It's more like something that has more access than you know. So people fear. There's an element of fearing the internet. The feeling is that there's too much information about me or about people, because when you Google and so forth, you find all the information about certain people or certain things. So they don't see it in the positive. It's more like I'm available. Like I can tell you, like recently, I think some people were talking about this issue where ZANU-PF personalities would. For me, I voted 126 in Zimbabwe primary school. So the member of parliament for ZANU-PF is currently says, Amadou Mukase, you know, Kumbira voted in 130. All the details it is Multi-Votero, and everyone else will panic. So that is how the issue of internet is viewed. To say everything about me is known. Everything about me is available. There are some people who know so much about me. So the internet is seen at that level. I think it's at the perception level. So to then take away the perception to the reality is to say what is the good thing about the internet. So the good things are not so well celebrated.
In the rural area.
Yes. It's the other thing. People see more of the negative. To say internet is all about investigating me and knowing everything about me. And when the internet knows who I am, the internet can abuse me. So because we are having this discussion, I think it would be important, as you are saying, to go with it deeper, to say no, it has its negative, but it also has its positives.
henceforward, but we're talking about perceptions in the rural areas. My friend.
Okay, thank you. I just want to add from what he said. It's not only, I mean, within the rural areas, even here in the urban areas, we discover that when you talk about cyber security, cyber view, what is it? People, they don't understand. Such an extent that someone can say now have this cyber security and cyber view. That means we're going to know everything that you're going to be talking about in your WhatsApp, in your Facebook, whatever you're going to share. Somewhere, somehow, someone is already having that information. To such an extent that even people now, they'll be afraid to say, what is talking about political issues like in this season, people are talking about politics, right? If I share my views concerning whatever I wish within, about the upcoming elections, someone else said, because there is something called cyber view, there's something called cyber security. The information I'm sharing, somewhere there's someone who is accessing that. So there's really a need to educate people, even in our urban areas, in our urban setups, even other civil society organizations who are not in the media and whatever issues. I mean, we talk about, we're doing women issues, we're talking about these other issues, right? But there's a great need for people to be conscientized about internet, about all these other factors that involve internet usage, so that the community, they now know, they now understand. Because if you say, I'm going to have a petition about this, they don't even know anything. So there's a great need for the civil society now to educate, to be educated as well, and to educate people within their various communities.
Thank you. She's talking about public awareness, about the role and significance of the internet in the communities, so that people can understand the significance and the role internet plays in our lives. Any?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I'd like to just add a bit and agree that this cybercrime bill is actually being more and more used, not so much as legislation that promotes democratic internet governance, but more as a tool of instilling fear within citizens. Just as much as those ZEC SMSs, for example, have that ripple effect to say, if they can really know my number and where I'm possibly going to be voting, or if you just get a message, especially particularly of a political nature, that is a cyber crime. Already the WhatsApp groups and so forth, what will be circulating around is, this you can be criminalized for expressing yourself. So I don't know how we can then couch that this bill, the Parliament should take a leadership role to say, no, this is actually not to criminalize you, but to protect and to promote your rights.
Yeah, I get you. That's why we had some 2 roadshows around issues of publicity, issues of awareness, and you guys are saying we need more of those, so that the public understands how the internet service the democratic ideal that we seek for, and how it promotes our socio-economic issues and our real life.
I think just to agree with him, I also think that this advocacy must also even go not only to government, but within pressure groups and opposition political parties as well. Because we have seen demands for opposition parties or other pressure groups that actually undermine any data advocacy. For example, you have parties actually demanding the release of more information than necessary, which can then be used to intimidate people, like he's saying. So I think this awareness should also be within the political realm and also within advocacy of civil societies to know exactly what they are advocating for and the effects of such demands.
Yes, I get you. I remember one opposition political party calling its members to a disciplinary hearing for discussions on the internet over police issues. So it's not limited to government, but also within civil society and within the opposition itself. That people don't like open discussion and public questioning of issues on the internet. Any comments? If you don't have any more, I think, Mr. Chairman, I just is over. We want to.
Oh yeah, maybe I just for all of us. I think there could be a perception that these issues only are to do with government. But I think one development that we are having is that of government actually going into bed with the private sector in terms of these issues, data abuse and so on and so forth. So I think that thrust will also have to be included, to be infused into the activism around this issue.